Abigail Tremaine stands in front of her bathroom mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. Her hair, once dark, is now pulled tightly into a grey bun. The deep wrinkles around her eyes and lips are permanent markers of time. Her arms are veined, yet still strong enough to dig a vegetable garden in the backyard. At 78, she has spent 42 years meticulously shaping her life around one core principle: precision. It's an unyielding belief, one instilled in her since childhood. A belief that mistakes are unacceptable, that everything must be correct down to the smallest detail. She reflects back on her years as an IRS inspector, the unrelenting drive that had earned her the nickname Iron Lady among her colleagues. The moniker, given by her co-workers at the IRS, had been a point of pride for her. It was a recognition of the image she had carefully crafted, a woman who demanded respect through her unyielding standards. She had no room for softness. In a world dominated by numbers, tax returns, and financial regulations, she had to be tougher than anyone else. Abigail spent over 4 decades at the IRS in Carson City, building a reputation as someone who never tolerated errors. Her strictness was legendary, and she prided herself on her ability to uncover discrepancies others couldn't see. But as she looked in the mirror, there was no one left to prove anything to. It was just her now, in a house that seemed too big for one person. The walls that once echoed with the voices of her family now stood in silence. But she had never complained. That wasn't in her nature. As a child, Abigail had grown up in a strict household, raised by a father who believed in discipline and hard work. Her mother, on the other hand, was more gentle, offering love and emotional support. The duality of her parents shaped Abigail's worldview. Her father's obsession with perfection had become her own, while her mother's soft demeanor was a side of her life she didn't often allow others to see. From a young age, Abigail learned that success was earned, that failure had no place in her life. Her father made sure of that. She had been expected to excel in everything, whether it was schoolwork or household chores. There was no room for mistakes. And so, Abigail became diligent, focusing on doing everything right. She was a model student, and later, a model employee. Her mind became sharp and her work ethic impenetrable. Her father's tough love shaped her into the woman she became. There was no room for softness in her life. And so, when she went off to college and later joined the IRS, the same principles applied. The work was demanding and she found herself in a male-dominated world. But she didn't mind. She thrived in it. In fact, it was the perfect place for her, where her no-nonsense approach could shine. There was no room for mistakes in the tax code, and Abigail was more than willing to ensure that everyone else understood that. Despite the challenges she faced, Abigail's career soared. The male colleagues at the IRS were skeptical of her at first. Who was this young woman, just out of college, trying to climb the ranks? They didn't believe she had the stamina, the backbone. But Abigail didn't back down. She worked harder than anyone else, enduring long hours and tight deadlines. Slowly, her skills began to shine. Her precision, her attention to detail, and her insistence on thorough audits made her indispensable. By the time she was in her mid-30s, she was already a chief inspector at the IRS, respected and feared by her peers. Her reputation as a meticulous, unflinching auditor became her shield and her weapon. At the height of her career, Abigail was invincible. She was a force within the IRS, known for her keen eye and ironclad discipline. But all that success came at a price. It wasn't just her work that kept her occupied, it was her entire identity. There was no room for anything else. Not love, not family. It was all about the numbers, about ensuring that no mistake went uncorrected, no matter the cost. And, though Abigail didn't know it yet, This relentless pursuit of perfection would eventually take its toll on her marriage to Wallace. Wallace had come into her life like a calm in the middle of a storm. He was different from anyone Abigail had ever met. A man of integrity and patience, he worked as a bridge designer. He had an eye for details, but unlike Abigail, he didn't let those details consume him. He could relax, he could breathe, and he could laugh. He and Abigail first met during a tax audit of his company. Most people would have tried to charm Abigail, hoping to sway her opinion. But Wallace was different. He argued with her about tax deductions, not out of spite, but out of passion. He debated with her about the details of the audit for hours, and though Abigail was initially annoyed, she eventually found herself admiring his knowledge and determination. Their relationship wasn't immediate, and neither of them expected it. But over time, Abigail found herself drawn to him. Wallace wasn't intimidated by her. He didn't try to change her, and he wasn't afraid of her strength. 6 months later, they were married. It was a surprise to everyone, including Abigail herself. She had never been one to believe in love at first sight. She had always focused on the practical side of life, the logical choice, the right step. And marriage to Wallace seemed like the next step, the thing to do. For the first few years of their marriage, they complemented each other. Wallace was more relaxed, more forgiving. He didn't mind when Abigail worked long hours, and he never complained. He understood that she needed her space, her time. And in return, he gave her love, patience, and stability. Their partnership was built on mutual respect, though Abigail's work often took precedence. She climbed the ranks at the IRS, pushing her career forward with relentless determination. Wallace, on the other hand, built physical structures, bridges that would last for generations. He often joked that his work was a reflection of his own legacy. "You build bridges that stand the test of time," Abigail had once told him. Just like you. Wallace's work stood as a testament to his life, his legacy. He built things that were meant to last, while Abigail had built something different, her reputation. Both were proud of their achievements, but each came with its own set of sacrifices. Ezra, their only child, was born later in life. Abigail had resisted motherhood for years, afraid it would interfere with her career. But Wallace was patient, urging her to consider having a family. "Better late than never," he had said when they first discussed it. Abigail had agreed, and at 36, Ezra came into their lives. The arrival of Ezra marked a turning point. He was the center of their world, the one thing they could both agree on. Abigail, now a respected chief inspector at the IRS, was suddenly faced with balancing her career with motherhood. She had always been strict, holding herself to impossibly high standards, and Ezra would be no different. She was determined to raise him with the same discipline she had grown up with, ensuring he was prepared for the challenges the world would throw at him. But Wallace, ever the gentle soul, tried to balance Abigail's strictness with warmth. He believed a child needed both discipline and love, but Abigail was focused solely on discipline. She feared that softness would lead to failure. And as Ezra grew, it became clear that he needed more from her than she could offer. He was sensitive, artistic, and needed the warmth that Abigail struggled to provide. Wallace often told Abigail, "Let him breathe, Abby. He's not a tax return to be filed away." Abigail's rise at the IRS was marked by numerous achievements. She became the go-to person for the most difficult audits, the one they trusted, with the most complicated cases. Her skills were unparalleled, and she became a pillar in the organization. But at the same time, the emotional distance between her and Ezra grew. He wasn't the stern, driven child Abigail had envisioned. He was creative, introspective, and increasingly distant from his mother's world. And as Abigail stood in front of the mirror, she couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. She had achieved everything she had ever set out to do except one thing. She had lost her son. The boy she had once held close, the boy who had relied on her, was now growing up, pulling away. And Abigail couldn't figure out when it had all started to unravel. Abigail Tremaine had spent her entire career mastering the art of precision, but when it came to raising her son, Ezra, she found herself caught in a web of emotional contradictions. Her strict nature, shaped by years of demanding discipline from herself, was applied to Ezra without question. Yet, as he grew, it became clear that her rigid expectations, though born of love and a desire for his success, were suffocating him. When Abigail had first become a mother, she approached it with the same seriousness she did her work. She wanted to raise Ezra the way she had been raised, strong, disciplined, capable of achieving anything through sheer hard work. She didn't allow him the luxury of indulgences, the comfort of leniency. Life wasn't about feeling good. It was about succeeding, about pushing through obstacles and achieving excellence. She believed that if she instilled these principles in him from an early age, Ezra would be equipped to thrive in a world that didn't care about feelings, only results. But what Abigail hadn't realized was that Ezra wasn't just a smaller version of herself. He was a different person altogether, sensitive, artistic, and inclined to find comfort in creativity, not in rigid schedules and expectations. Abigail hadn't accounted for the fact that children didn't just absorb what you gave them. They were shaped by their own unique personalities. As Ezra entered his teenage years, Abigail's authority became more of a battleground than a guide. She would demand that he focus on his studies, excel at school, follow a strict routine. But Ezra didn't respond the way Abigail had hoped. Instead of blossoming under her stern guidance, he began to pull away. He grew quieter, more distant. Where once he had eagerly shared his school projects or his excitement over a new book, now he became more reticent, more inclined to withdraw into his own world. Wallace noticed the changes in his son. "Let him breathe, Abby," he'd say softly. After another disagreement between Abigail and Ezra, "He's not a machine. He needs room to grow." But Abigail didn't see it that way. She didn't want to be too lenient. She feared that if she didn't push Ezra to work hard, to strive for perfection, he wouldn't make it in the world. She had risen to the top through relentless effort, and she believed Ezra could do the same. He just needed to work harder. But as she watched him grow more distant, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing him. At the same time, Abigail's career was flourishing. She was recognized as one of the best inspectors at the IRS. Her reputation for uncovering the smallest discrepancies and finding hidden loopholes was unmatched. But the higher she rose in her career, the more isolated she became at home. Her work consumed her life. Abigail began spending long hours at the office, leaving Wallace to handle the day-to-day responsibilities of their family. Wallace, ever the supportive husband, didn't complain. But he had always known that Abigail's focus on her work had created a growing distance between her and Ezra. He was the one who took Ezra to his little league games, helped him with his homework, and played the role of the more affectionate parent. Abigail had always been too busy, too focused on her next case, too absorbed in the demands of her job. "Do you ever wonder what's happening to him?" Wallace would ask, his voice tinged with concern. Abigail would brush it off. "He's fine, Wallace. He just needs to focus, just like I did." But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Ezra wasn't the child she had envisioned raising. He wasn't the high achiever she had expected him to be. And as he got older, his interests shifted. He wasn't interested in finance or law, the paths Abigail had hoped he'd follow. Instead, Ezra was drawn to nature. He became fascinated with water, lakes, rivers, and streams. It wasn't something Abigail understood, but it became clear that Ezra was happiest when he was near water. One evening, when Ezra was in his early 20s, he told Abigail he was thinking about becoming a municipal water engineer. "Water is life, Mom," he explained, his eyes alight with passion. But Abigail, always practical, couldn't help but think, what can he do with that? How is that going to support him? Her response was a joke, one that fell flat. "And taxes are death," she'd quipped. But Ezra didn't get the irony. To him, taxes were an alien world, and the idea of following in his mother's footsteps seemed unappealing. Years passed, and as Ezra grew older, he began to form his own life, his own family. It was around this time that Ived Bington entered the picture. Abigail's first impression of Ived was icy. There was something calculated about the young woman, something that rubbed Abigail the wrong way. Ived's cold eyes, her half-smile, and the way she seemed to always have an angle made Abigail wary. She worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic, but Abigail could tell there was more ambition behind her quiet demeanor than she let on. When Ezra introduced Ive to Abigail, she was polite but distant. It wasn't that she disliked Ived, it was just that she saw something in her that felt insincere. As the days passed, Abigail's reservations grew. She noticed how Ive would always have the perfect answer, the perfect solution to everything. It seemed as though she was always one step ahead, manipulating situations in a way that Abigail didn't quite trust. "Ive's amazing, Mom," Ezra said one evening as he gazed at his fiancée with adoration. But Abigail couldn't help but see the cold calculation in Ived's eyes. It wasn't love that she saw, it was strategy. And Abigail didn't like it. But she didn't say anything. She had learned long ago that criticizing Ezra's choices only led to distance between them. And so, when they announced their engagement, Abigail stayed silent. She had no choice. The wedding was small, just a modest ceremony at City Hall. There was a dinner afterward, paid for mostly by Abigail. Then came the comparisons. At first. It was subtle. Ezra would casually mention how Ived's parents had never made her study something she didn't want to. "You know, Mom, Ive's parents didn't push her into anything. They let her choose her own path." Abigail felt the sting of the comparison. She hadn't pushed Ezra to be something he wasn't. She had only tried to prepare him for the real world. But Ezra didn't see it that way. The comparisons grew sharper with time. When Abigail refused to share the secret of her apple pie recipe with Ived, Ezra made a remark at one family dinner. "You know, Ive's mom teaches her how to make this pie, and she doesn't keep anything a secret." It stung. Every comparison, every jab at her parenting, at her ways of doing things, felt like a little needle piercing her heart. But she couldn't speak up. Her pride wouldn't let her. Every time she thought about confronting Ezra, she held back, because Abigail knew that if she said anything, it would only push him further away. And she was terrified of losing him entirely. As time went on, Ezra became more distant. Visits became fewer. Calls were shorter. He began to compare his relationship with Ive's family to his relationship with Abigail. "Ive's parents always support her decisions," he once said. "They always help her out. You don't do that for me, Mom." Each comment felt like a betrayal. Abigail had given Ezra everything she could: discipline, guidance, love, and tough love. But to him, it never felt like enough. In the midst of all of this, Abigail found herself increasingly isolated. She had lost her connection with Ezra, and Wallace's death 10 years ago had left an even bigger void. She missed him, his warmth, his gentleness. But more than that, she missed the man who had balanced her rigid, structured life with his warmth and humor. Wallace had always told her, "Abby, let the boy breathe. You're pushing him away." Abigail had never taken his advice. But now, as she looked at the man, Ezra was becoming distant, resentful, and increasingly absorbed in his new family. She began to wonder if Wallace had been right. Abigail Tremaine sat alone in her kitchen, staring out the window at the small vegetable garden she had planted. The garden was a symbol of the life she had built, both a place of solace and a reminder of everything she had lost. Outside, the world seemed at peace, birds chirping, the gentle rustling of the leaves in the warm breeze, but inside Abigail was anything but at peace. Her thoughts churned with a quiet fury, the remnants of a life spent doing everything for everyone else. It had been 3 weeks since Ezra had called to tell her that he was planning to celebrate his 42nd birthday with just his new family. "We're going to have a small dinner, just family," he had said. When she had offered to bake his favorite chocolate cake, the response had been polite, almost dismissive. "Oh, don't worry, Ive's mom already promised to make it. She makes an amazing cake, you know. Real cream, never margarine." That simple remark, said with such casual disregard, was the final straw. Another comparison, another reminder of how Ezra and Ive had elevated Ive's parents while tearing down everything Abigail had worked for. Every time Ezra spoke about Ive's family, it felt like a knife twisting deeper into her heart. She had spent years building her career, making sure Ezra was prepared for the real world, pushing him to succeed. But all he saw were the failures, her strictness, her lack of warmth, the absence of indulgence. And now, this. He had grown distant, and it was no longer a matter of just a strained relationship. It was as if Ezra had already moved on without her. And as she sat there in the kitchen, staring at the garden Wallace had helped her plant so many years ago, Abigail felt an overwhelming wave of realization wash over her. Ezra had made his choice, and now it was time for her to make hers. It was time to reclaim her life. The decision didn't come lightly. Abigail had always been a woman of principle, a woman who had built her life around duty, sacrifice, and responsibility. But somewhere along the way, in the pursuit of perfection, she had forgotten to live for herself. The realization was as sharp as it was painful. She had given everything, her time, her love, her energy, and for what? A son who now barely knew her, a daughter-in-law who seemed to barely tolerate her, and a life that felt more like an endless series of tasks than a life well-lived. No more. She would show them. She would show Ezra that she could be generous, that she, too, could make grand gestures. And if they wanted to cut her out of their lives, then fine. She wouldn't chase after them. She would make her own mark. The next morning, Abigail got up early, as she always did. She brewed her coffee, did the chores around the house, and, for the first time in a long while, felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just anger, it was a surge of energy, of purpose. She was done being the person everyone took for granted. It was time to take control of her own life, to stop being the one who constantly gave and gave without ever receiving. She picked up the phone and dialed the number for the Silver Moose, the most upscale restaurant in Carson City. She had passed by it countless times over the years, but she had never stepped inside. It had always seemed like an indulgence too extravagant for someone like her, someone who was used to saving every penny. But now it felt like the perfect place to make a statement, to show Ezra and Ive that she, too, could be generous. She could give them an experience they would never forget, something far beyond what Ive's family could ever offer. "Good morning." A young man answered the phone at the Silver Moose, his voice polite and professional. "How may I help you?" "I'd like to make a reservation for my son's birthday," Abigail said. her voice steady, but with a hint of determination. For 8 p.m. this Friday, please. Of course, ma'am. Let me check availability for that time, the host replied. A few moments passed before he spoke again. I'm afraid all our tables for Friday night are booked. Would you like to try for a different date? No, Abigail said firmly. I need that table for Friday, and I'm willing to pay more. I'm prepared to pay double if necessary. A slight pause on the other end of the line. I see. Let me check again, he said. His voice now filled with more interest. A few moments passed before he returned. We have one table available for 8 p.m. by the window. It's one of our best spots. Would you like to reserve it? Abigail's heart swelled with a strange mixture of satisfaction and triumph. Yes, that will do perfectly. Thank you. She hung up the phone and, for the first time in what felt like years, allowed herself to feel a sense of accomplishment. She had done something for herself for once. She hadn't been the one to sacrifice. She had booked the finest table in town, and she was going to treat Ezra and his family to a night they wouldn't forget. She went to the Silver Moose to pay the deposit. She walked into the restaurant, the plush interior and the quiet hum of conversation greeting her. The manager, a tall man with graying hair, greeted her at the door. Ma'am, welcome to the Silver Moose. How may I assist you today? I need to make a deposit for a reservation, Abigail said, her voice firm as she walked up to the counter. The reservation for 8 p.m. this Friday, the manager said, checking his records. Everything is set, but we require a 20% deposit for reservations. Like this. Abigail reached into her purse, pulling out a stack of cash. She had saved every penny for this moment, and now she was ready to spend it. She slid $500 across the counter. Make it 50%. I want everything to be perfect. The manager raised his eyebrows in surprise, but professionally, he took the cash. Thank you, ma'am. Everything will be arranged. We'll have a selection of the finest wines and desserts, and we'll ensure the evening is flawless. As Abigail left the restaurant, she felt an unfamiliar thrill. For once, she wasn't worrying about what anyone else thought. She wasn't trying to please Ezra or Ived or anyone else. She was doing this for herself, and it felt good. She was reclaiming control of her life, taking back the power she had given away for so long. But the real shift happened when she received a call from Hope, her granddaughter, a few days before the dinner. Hope's voice was cautious, filled with concern. Grandma, I don't know how to say this, but I overheard Mom and Dad talking. They're planning to move to Portland, and they didn't want to tell you yet. They're going to announce it at dinner. Abigail's heart dropped. Moving? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Are they leaving for good? Hope hesitated, then responded, Yes, Grandma. They said they're going to announce it after the dinner on Dad's birthday. They want a fresh start. But they didn't want you there when they told you, because they know it'll upset you. Abigail sat back, feeling the weight of the words. Her son, the boy she had raised, was preparing to cut ties with her, and Ived was at the center of it all. For years, Abigail had tried to be a good mother, to support Ezra in every way she knew how. But Ived and her family had slowly woven themselves into Ezra's life, pulling him away from his roots. And now, Ezra was making the decision to leave her. Abigail knew that if she allowed them to do this, she would be left alone. Her son, her only family, would be gone. Abigail spent the next few days preparing for the dinner. But there was a new weight in her heart, now a decision she had to make. She would still attend the dinner, but she wouldn't sit idly by. She wouldn't be the meek mother who silently endured disrespect. She would let them know that she had made her decision. When Ezra and Ived arrived, all smiles and excitement about their new life, Abigail was ready. She didn't just have a reservation for a fancy dinner. She had a gift for them, one they would never forget. As they sat down at the table, Abigail took a deep breath and slid a folder across to Ezra. "This is my will," she said softly, but firmly. "I've decided to donate the house to the Carson City Single Senior Citizens Foundation, and the rest of my savings will go there as well." There was a stunned silence. Ezra's face turned pale. "Mom, what are you saying? You can't do this. This is our home." Abigail remained calm. "You're planning to leave. I'm just following suit and donating my house and the rest of my savings to those who truly need it. The foundation will use the property to support the elderly." The conversation that followed was filled with shock and disbelief. Ives' voice trembled with anger. "You can't just do this. This is a family home. I made my decision," Abigail said firmly. "Just like you made yours." The aftermath of the dinner was a blur. Ezra called a few times, but Abigail had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let herself be disrespected any longer. She was done being the one to always give. Now it was her turn to take control of her life. Months passed. Ezra and Ives had left for Portland, and the relationship between them and Abigail remained strained. But for the first time in years, Abigail felt free. She had made the decision to live for herself, to take control of her destiny. And in doing so, she had reclaimed her power. And then, one evening, as Abigail sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hope came to visit. She sat beside her grandmother, and the two of them talked about life, about the future, about all the things that Abigail had once feared but now embraced. For the first time in years, Abigail felt at peace.